Do you struggle to get the most important jobs in the day done? Do you struggle to focus? In this episode, we're going to show you the tips, tricks, and hacks to turn your focus into a true competitive advantage. Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman Podcast. On today's show, we have Curt Steinhorst. He is the author of the brand new book, Can I Have Your Attention?, which is available on Amazon. We'll link to it in the show notes of this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com as well. On today's episode, we're diving into focus, attention, why some people have it, why most of us don't, why it's getting worse, and how to hack your way to be able to focus on a spreadsheet, on your emails, on your cold calls, whatever it is, without getting lost in the day-to-day things, with all the pings coming in at you, how you can focus and get the job done. And so with all that said, let's jump into today's episode. Curt, welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
I'm excited to be here, Will. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited about this conversation where we're going to have about talking about focus in at work, because I feel like even though we perhaps focus on salespeople, their customers, that environment, that high-paced environment, how we can focus better there, I feel like this is applicable to areas outside of work as well. So hopefully at the end of the show, if we've got time, we can translate things over. But I want to lead with an example that I think you will be more than aware of, and I think the audience will probably smile as they hear this as well. But when we're talking about focus, why is it that, having just wrapped up the final episode of this season's Game of Thrones, I can sit there for 40, 50 minutes, whatever it is, with no phone, no intention of getting my phone out, no distractions from anyone. Someone rang the doorbell. I just completely ignored them because I was so wrapped up with the dragons, the breasts, the fighting, everything else that's going on in the show. Why is it that I can focus there, but then I sit down and I use the Pomodoro technique, which I'm sure you're aware of, and we can perhaps touch on this, but if I sit down to do 25 minutes of emails, 7 minutes into the emails, I'm doing something completely different. Why is it that I can focus in one area, but it's difficult to focus in another?
First, I have to say that the fact that you're able to watch a TV show means that you're better than basically anyone else. In fact, 9 out of 10 people today, or 88% to be precise, when watching TV, actively use a second device. So we have actually seen the period of time where the device that was historically attributed as a cause of ADD is now those that can focus only on it are the best we have. So you're in good position there. The other thing with Game of Thrones is that they put together a great narrative. They have done an amazing job in terms of the visual effects. They know how to cast characters. And it's in those rare moments that we actually have all of the recipe for what can drive focus. Hyperfocus is the particular type that we're talking about there, that is completely different than the way that we live the rest of our lives. At our core, we're really not made to focus. We're made to want to seek out new and novel stimulus, to want to find something new. Whenever we're focused in one direction, if I was in a jungle and reading Shakespeare, life would not be good for me. I would not survive. And so in a lot of ways, we're the beneficiaries of what created survival in a different period of time.
Interesting. And does this change? Is this malleable? Because we know the stereotype, and I've talked about this on the show before, of I will sit there and watch the football or wherever's on the TV, and I'll probably have my phone there, and I'll be perhaps looking at something related to the football in a text format. My dad would typically be watching the football with no phone out, but then my little brother would be watching one video on his phone with a headphone in whilst half watching the football. And I don't want to get into whether this is an age thing, but is our focus malleable on the stimulation around us, or are we just destined to always kind of need more and more and more stimulation? As in, if we look 20 years into the future, heck knows, there'll be things prodding us and poking us just to make us pay attention to anything.
Yes and yes. We call this neuroplasticity in the science, that our brain is constantly changing as a function of what we've experienced before. And so, and there's several factors that actually shape whether in a particular space, in a particular time, we're able to focus or not focus. But at the simplest level, the more that we practice distraction, the more that we practice what a lot of people call multitasking, flipping back and forth from one thing to another, the more we need it. And what we're doing is we're playing into that whole basic survival mechanism that makes us get a reward in our brain, the neurotransmitter dopamine, anytime we go out searching for something new. And so the more we do it, the more we need it, the less we're able to focus. Now, which things will actually facilitate our ability to focus, that's largely individual as a combination of past experiences and natural brain mechanisms, between what we're born into and things like that.
So 50 years ago, we still had the same inability to focus, but we had less things pulling for our attention. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. And well, never naturally wired to focus, but there are several things that were helping us back then that are really hindering us now. So I'll give a couple of them here. Number one is our environment. That's the most basic thing. But it's not just that we have too many things in our environment. It's that we've lost the distinctiveness of different places. Used to, if I was in a field, I was working. If I was at home, I was with the kids. If I was in bed, I was sleeping. Well, now, because of these amazing devices, it allows us to be really everywhere all the time. And what makes that hard is what we focus on is meant to be environmentally specific. So we're meant to play a specific role in a spot. And when we interrupt that spot with fantasy football at our desks and with work emails at our kitchen table, now we're actually making ourselves, when we sit down in those places, think that that's what we're supposed to do. And that makes it really, really hard.
Because I anecdotally feel that, now you've said it, of this studio here is just the spare bedroom in my flat. And I feel like when I'm here, just in the flat, and this is probably, and I guess we can debate this and talk about this as well, it's probably a good thing for the business's sake that when I'm in this flat, I feel like at 9, 10 o'clock, I could squeeze out a little bit more work. I could put out a bit more content. I can make that email, that contact. And it does push me, because when I go home and visit my dad, I just don't do anything. And it's probably because I've associated living with him as a kid or the time I spend with him now. I will literally just sit and talk to him with no TV on, phones turned off for hours on end, only talking complete nonsense like most people do with their parents. It's only the same old, like, what did you do this week? Or, it's what you would be asked when you were a child of, what did you do at school? He's asking me, well, how was the business doing? And there's no real value or insights coming from these conversations, but I can sit there kind of filtered and not be worrying about what's going on elsewhere. So let me ask you this then, Curt. Is this something that we should be using as a tool as opposed to something that's a hindrance to us? Should I be almost encouraging myself that when I'm in this flat, because my girlfriend's got a house as well, so I kind of live back and forth between the two. But when I'm here, should I be almost engineering that this is the place that till I sleep, I'm sat there working? Or is that unhealthy altogether?
Yeah, so what you've just described is one of the single most important ways that we can hack our own brain, and we can actually have our habits work for us rather than against us. Now, does that mean that every single place that we are should only, we should only be on our phones when we are sitting, only on our phones when we're out on the couch, but when we're at work, we should never pick up our phones? No, but the more that we can find, particularly for the really important work that we're doing, distinct places that everything about the environment, when we walk into it, we only do these types of activities. The more, 6 months from now, 3 months from now, a week from now, it'll be easier rather than harder. And the other thing is, it's actually really great to have a place where you get to go and not have to think about work. And the double-edged sword here is that we go everywhere and find ourselves partially working, but then we go to work and we don't work. And it's actually really, really healthy for us if we can say, this particular location, this spot is going to be reserved for my hardest work. And then these other places, we can live in the mix and the benefits of having everything available to us. And then we have a couple spaces where we say this is reserved specifically for the most important things at home, which are having casual conversations and not having to think at all about the role we're playing at work.
So I'm going to be super selfish here, but you're going to be able to offer an amazing insight, I'm sure. Some of the audience will know I'm kind of a third of the way through processing a book, which is talking about all what I've learned from the podcast over the past 3 years of doing it. Your book, you've written it, just about to be released as we record this episode, but as the episode airs, it'll be out there. Did you have a specific place, location, or strategy to write a book, to have a specific laptop, for example, or a specific desk or something along those lines? And I'm thinking here in the back of my mind, if the audience can use this for, I hate doing sales emails and processing customer emails. And so I have one desk in the corner of the room over here that I basically just do emails on, not through any insight, but just through a habit that's formed, basically. So with your book writing, was there anything you did specifically for that I can pinch and start to encourage me to write more often? And is that what we should be aiming for within the work environment of perhaps we go and we do cold calls in the morning. So we go for a specific walk to a specific place to do the cold calls. Is that helping instill a habit by being in certain locations?
Yes, that's so.
I'll just say this. I've just thrown about 15 questions at you, so I can break it down further if we need to.
No, you're good. I'll start with my own personal story in this. I definitely found a place. So, actually, we're sitting in my home office right now. I have a work office, and this home office is where I did most of my writing. And I did that because I get into the office and I have a ton of people that have things for me and I have questions for them. And so this right here is where I did almost all of my writing exclusively. So yeah, I have this. Now there's a couple extra layers here. The other one is I travel a lot for work, speaking and consulting and coaching people. And in that scenario, what I did is I made sure that I had types of places. So I would, and this seems ironic, but people would say, okay, so you're going to do it at the desk in the hotel. Maybe. But what I actually did is I find, for another reason, which we can talk about, the morning is where I'm going to get my most difficult, hard to do things I don't want to do work done. And so I would go to the breakfast place and I would put on my Bose headphones and I would get my food and I would actually do my writing for 2 hours in that location. And so that became the place that I did writing. And yeah, so that was my strategy. And I highly recommend saying, especially for the stuff that we don't want to do, that requires real intense focus to both get the because it involves creativity and strategy and critical thinking, and that takes a little bit of time to get into, like having a place where it's really, really important. Now, the other layer here, and might add that mentioning like where I do calls, in the book, I talk about one of the best things you can do for spaces is design them based on functionality and the roles that you play. So with the travel, I have to be in admirals clubs. Having different places where I can sit to do different types of work is really one of the best things that you can do. Now, here's the big caveat. There was actually a study that showed that people that read in different locations for school, so these are graduate students, they actually had their attention go up when they moved locations. And what that was actually spotlighting is a thing that we call inhibitory spillover. It means that it's almost like a minor version of ADD medication where the background noise creates just enough stimulation on our brain that it makes us be able to actually focus in. And so having similar places is really important, but if we're struggling to focus, sometimes having similar types of locations but moving can be helpful. So, going to the same coffee shops for this type of work, but maybe moving coffee shops every couple of weeks can actually be helpful. And
you're going to have to excuse me, I don't think I've ever done this in an episode before, Curt, but I'm going to stand up. I'm going to put my headphones down for a second. I'm going to reach across and get something that's on this desk because there's a hack here that you just kind of subtly mentioned that's changed my my productivity altogether. So the audience hopefully can still somewhat hear me. But these Bose noise cancelling headphones, I wear these in my studio here in the flat when I'm on the computer. I sleep in them now pretty much exclusively almost every night if I'm not with the missus. And these are game changing. The only reason I don't wear them with when I'm recording the studio is obviously they've got batteries, they can run out of cables, always more reliable. But I find when I'm sleeping, the noise cancellation isn't perfect and there's almost kind of a light bit of white noise, and that I don't play anything through them, but that just sets me off and I can sleep easier, and that might be a habit as well. On planes, obviously, where most people buy them for, I think, because they're quite expensive. So I think a lot of people travel by them. On planes, they're amazing. They get rid of that horrible din from the engines as you're flying along. So I can sleep on planes and I can't sleep without them. But then I wear them 24 hours a day, essentially in the studio here when I'm working, because the audience, if they've ever watched any of the tours I've done on the studio on YouTube, I've got a network storage solution over there. We've got laptops running. I've got 2 computers. I've got one for working on. I've got all for rendering videos. These are all running constantly. And it's all just this tiny hum that when you're in the room, you don't really notice. But then you put these bad boys on, you turn them on, and that just hum disappears. And it's just silent. It's almost a weird silence. And I can focus so much better. I can focus for longer. I've just got so much more attention wearing these, and these I've probably had them about 6 months now, but it was real game changing for me. And obviously it's not appropriate to wear them in all locations, and and all the time, but I never do emails or anything that's somewhat repetitive or needs direct focus at at a screen, for example. I never work without them now. And I just want to get your thoughts on this, just to make sure that I'm not a total loon, and I don't want to over exaggerate it for the audience. So if you don't feel the same, let me know. But these are a real game changer for me.
Yeah, no. So there's a couple things that I can describe as to why that's happening. The first really simple reason is it's an association now. So the first time you put them on, you were able to block out some noise that otherwise grabs your attention, because our brain is made to have our environment make us look in new directions. So that helps you lock in. And now there's an association. So every time you put them on, it's another way of almost getting to your environment. This environment, which is not just what you see, but it's also what you hear, now associates with means I'm going to lock down and work. So that's a major part of it, and I highly recommend it. Now, here's a couple things related to headphones that I see go wrong, because I do the same thing. One is there's cultural costs in some organizations, especially when you start adding in multiple generations. Older generations think, being on your headphones means that you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to something, you're not working, you're just blocking out the group. And so what I would highly recommend is making sure there's a conversation around it if you're in a workplace. It's actually one of the hardest things I deal with executives that I work with. Your people, your sales guys that are putting on their headphones, it's actually a good thing. You want them to do that, but you need to talk about it. Otherwise, they'll think you're not being a part of the culture. And it's great if you can focus, but no one likes you. That's not exactly the recipe.
That's one way of putting it.
Yeah. So that's the first one. And then the second one is just, what do you have going through your headphones? Now, you just mentioned silence, which is what I use a lot, or I'll use white noise. I have a white noise app that is just like my best friend. Now, here's what doesn't work. Trying to do hard work while listening to music or podcasts is not a good idea. So put it really simply. If it involves words, your brain cannot process multiple inputs of language. So, I'll listen to podcasts when I'm doing the dishes. I'll listen to podcasts when I'm driving. I won't listen to podcasts when I'm writing an email. I won't reply to an email while I'm on a conference call, because what I'm really doing there is I'm delaying both of them. I'm making each one not very effective. So if you're going to listen to something, have it be classical music, have it be white noise. I'll give one last caveat with this. Occasionally, especially if you have tendencies towards ADD like me, you need so much stimulation that you're bored and you won't work. Okay, so if you listen to music with words that you've heard hundreds and hundreds of times, and it's the same songs over and over again, there can be a little bit of space there. But if you're putting something on that you are actually trying to sing along to, you're going to have problems.
What is the difference? And this just came to mind then, but what is the difference between using a label such as ADD, or you need stimulation to pay attention, versus someone who is just procrastinating on doing something? Because some of this, what we're describing here, I'm a terrible procrastinator, and I've read countless books on it. I've had countless people kick me in the ass over it. And it's almost a binary on-off switch in my head of my natural state is to procrastinate on things. But then as soon as I catch myself procrastinating, I've trained myself to then take action and get on with whatever I'm procrastinating over. But I don't always catch myself. So what's the difference between saying, well, I need this stimulation, or I need that white noise, otherwise I can't work, versus someone who just isn't putting the work in?
Great question, and a really fair question. So I'm going to give you two answers here. The first is there's an actual diagnosis for those who have ADD and those who have ADHD, and what that is simplified, but really what's taking place there is it has to do with the frontal cortex of your brain and not getting enough dopamine, either not receiving or not releasing enough dopamine, which makes us make better decisions. Because ultimately, when we're happier, we don't need to go seeking out new forms of stimulation, right? So there's a diagnosed component there. But the other component is it's certainly not black and white, and we're all moving towards the direction of distraction. And so the idea that some people either are or aren't is a little bit of a misnomer. It is a scale that everyone falls on and everyone's moving on, is the best way I can put that. And so today, in fact, when I started diving into this subject professionally, my educational background, undergrad and graduate studies, is in communication and technology. How does technology change it? And personal story, I had ADD diagnosis as a kid, and I start telling people about my struggles, and all of a sudden, everyone I talk to says they're having the same ones. And so today, I would say most people feel like they're ADD because no one's supposed to sit and look at a spreadsheet all day. We're doing things that we're not supposed to be doing. And so maybe better not to say, am I ADD or am I not, but instead just to say, have I set up the systems and processes to facilitate work, or am I becoming a victim to all the things available to me?
And this goes to, clearly neither of us are doctors here, so I'm not kind of going down the route of attempting to diagnose or talk about neurotransmitter levels and things like that. But are certain people better suited to certain roles? Are there some salespeople? So I've always done outside field sales in medical devices. So I'm literally driving to a hospital, going in theaters, speaking to a consultant, versus there's people who do an inside sales in which they're on the phone to a consultant or theater staff doing a similar role, but different products, different services. And so are some people better suited naturally to be in an office environment versus are people like me, perhaps, who need conversation stimulation? Are they better suited to being on the road and going out and seeing these individuals in person?
Yes, for sure. So there's definitely a component of just my natural strengths, who I am, suits me better to not be able to sit versus other people, suits me better to be outside better than other people. On the other hand, I think what we also have to be honest about is we're all going a direction. And as long as we say that it's actually an advantage for us to somehow not be capable of ever focusing on what we're supposed to do, then it gives us permission to not have to work on it. And the way that I like to think about focus is it's a lot like working out. No one likes to work out. Not one person I've ever met, even the guys that are in great shape, there's never a moment that they're like, you know what I would love most in the world is to work out rather than have a beer and watch a soccer game or watch a football game. It's just not how it works. But we have to make disciplined decisions so that our bodies and our minds are working towards the things that actually give us more of what we want. And so, hey, if you can't, I'm not naturally ever going to be a bodybuilder. On the other hand, I better find systems that allow me to not be in terrible shape and always eat the worst stuff.
For sure. So does a lot of this come down to just setting habits then? Because I know when we talk about doing exercise, for the past 4 months now, I've been lifting weights 3 times a week. I will never be a bodybuilder because I'm skinny as heck, and that's probably never going to change. But clearly there's countless studies on the benefits of lifting weights for all kinds of, your bone density getting older and just muscle mass and reduction of, I'm 30 and I'm considering the kind of the future of being 70 and falling over and breaking hips. So there's multiple elements to this versus just wanting to have a six pack and be a bodybuilder. And that encouraged me to set the habit of doing it. I hated it at first, but now I found myself doing this the other day. I stayed at my girlfriend's, came back to mine, and didn't even think about it. Just went in and did the kind of like squat, bench, and push routine that I've been doing. Is the solution to a lot of this overstimulation, this inability to focus? Can we wrap a lot of it up with just good habits?
Yes and no. So on the one hand, the world is those who can master their habits will win. Just to put it really simple. So yes, in that sense, habits are the secret. But on the other hand, there's a lot of hidden factors that shape how well we do this that are far easier to make sure we're setting up correctly rather than as simple as, I just need to do it and I need to do it better and I need to focus more. Because look, everybody knows they need to respond to the sale or respond to the client rather than check the newest message on social media. Everyone knows they need to do it. And they know that if they would do it, they might get habits to do it more often. And they know someone that makes them feel guilty for how well they focus. So we all have that. And as someone with this diagnosed component, which means that, I naturally can't focus on anything, what I can tell you is that there's better ways to think about it than just feeling guilty that we don't have the right habits or just trying to strengthen and grit it out whenever we don't like it. So I'll give you a couple of things around that category if that'd be helpful.
For sure. But just before you give us these, because I think there's a follow-up question here, which I think will tie into it. is you mentioned morning, getting your most important jobs done versus the evening. And then you mentioned this kind of inner voice that we all have of, I need to do the work, or the alternative is I'm just going to go and check Facebook for 5 minutes. The inner voice, kind of devil or angel on your shoulder. Does some of this come down to, just before we get into the practical steps of how we can avoid distractions, or how we can focus, the flip side of that, how we can focus for longer better? Does some of this come down to willpower as well? And that's kind of that's wrapped up in this morning versus afternoon idea of we've got more and a finite amount of willpower in the morning, and as we kind of get through the day, it drops.
Totally. So, there's a lot of, we can use a lot of different words to describe something. And what I would say, because of the framework that I think through, I would say that willpower is very deeply and closely connected to attention, because what we pay attention to ultimately pushes the direction we go, which is a significant driver of whether we overcome or we redirect our attention. Does that make sense? So they're very closely related. In the science, they have slightly different, there's subtle differences. So like Angela Duckworth's grit, a lot of the strategies around how we think about grit and willpower are connected, but they're not exact. How's that for clear as mud?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. So you mentioned one of the easy ones, and the energy is one of the big areas that both connects to willpower and connects to our capacity to focus. And this is one that we consistently find people that struggle with getting their stuff done just make one little error, and they don't realize that by having their hardest work structured and pushed towards the earlier part of the day, they're actually facilitating their ability to get it done. So every single decision we make, every time that we come up to an opportunity that we can either say, I'm going to go left or right, it makes the next one a little bit harder. And so the morning, and when I say morning, I mean whatever time you get up, not like got to be up at 6 a.m., whatever time you get up, you're going to have more ability to ignore the thing you're not supposed to do than you will by the end of the day. It's just that simple. So with the reminder that there's always this feeling of urgent need to reply to things. So I always start by reviewing my emails. I look to see if there's anything I really have to reply to, but rather than jumping into whatever hit my computer, I will actually write down all of the emails that demand a reply, and I'll slide those later in the afternoon because they don't get equal credit with me having to work on my book. Those don't get equal credit. But I will feel really good if I reply to 7 different emails at the beginning of the day and think I had this amazingly productive day. Then I get to the afternoon and all I want to do is have a beer, and that's when I'm supposed to do the thing that I have now saved. Now, sometimes you can get saved by things like procrastination and the chemicals that occur when we feel like we're on this urge. But it's really the non-urgent, critical tasks that kill us if we haven't done those before the loss of what's called ego depletion in our days.
I know from my perspective, I've got this overarching goal of the show, and this is from, I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The One Thing.
Of course.
So we've had Jay on the show to talk about this, and
great book.
He kind of drilled it into me that if my one thing is if the show gets X many more downloads, the finances, the revenue, all that stuff, bigger sponsorships, it all just happens because people want to be in front of that big audience. So my one thing is to grow the show's audience on the monthly download numbers. And so I put off things like, as you're describing, like emails when they're not totally urgent. With the audience, you email me, I will always email you back, but it might be some time before you get that response because I have to put out the show in the morning. I have to do the emails to get guests on. I have to go back and forth with the producer. I have to do that kind of thing that allows me to put out the content to grow the show. And so I have everything set up with that one priority. And I think for salespeople, we sometimes forget that our job is, well, if you want to be super assertive and direct about it, it's to drive revenue for the company that you work for. It's kind of a bit fluffier than that in that you don't want to be pissing off all your customers. And there's kind of other ethical things that go along with that. If you want to not go to home every night and feel like a bad person. But typically it's to drive revenue. And so I know in my sales world, when I was in medical devices, I would always respond to the customers quickly, but perhaps internally a bit slower and prioritize my emails and my activity there as well. And so I just wanted to kind of overemphasize the point here, Curt, that we need to know what our perhaps even our number one priority is, right? And then we need to focus on that and allow that to happen, which brings everything else along with it, versus treat everything the same.
That's right. And it's interesting. So I'll just add a layer here. One of the foundational challenges of today is that the volume of information that comes at us. So we receive and have to consume more than 400% of the amount of information somebody had to consume in 1986. Like, we're just constantly having to consume and digest and process and reply to information all the time. Some of it we like, some of it we don't, but we're overwhelmed by it. Here's one of the biggest problems with that. The more we consume, the less we have the capacity to differentiate importance. Now everything feels important. Like, whatever comes up is important, and we have to do it right now. And so we live in this state of reactive and chaotic internal anxiety. And when we do that, we might ultimately feel like we don't get enough done, or might feel like we get a lot done, but neither of those actually drive us forward. How we feel does not drive us forward. It's only because we take the space that's required to say what is actually, as you mentioned, what's creating revenue. Like, what is the linchpin factors? Because our customers, they're going to tell us 100 different things they need. They're going to reply immediately. And if I don't have systems in place to set expectations, to make sure that they're getting what they need without being a victim to whatever whim they have, because there's no cost to them lobbing a grenade over to our side, then I'll be fast, I'll be responsive, but I'll be nothing more than a transaction for them.
I love this. And I always ask myself this question of, when someone says something is urgent, my initial thought is, for a salesperson, there's plenty of studies that show that the quickest salesperson into a response when multiple emails or multiple requests for information have gone out, the first person in typically wins the business, like percentage-wise or statistically. But I also encourage the audience not to be in a business where, or in a sales role where, that's the differentiating factor, because you've not got the opportunity to really add value to the relationship. And you need to, talk about it all the time on the show, but I'm probably flogging a dead horse at this point. But I really encourage the audience to be in a sales role where it's complex, that isn't a deciding factor. That's, to me, is a red flag that your job probably isn't going to exist in 24 months' time, because an online order form, we call it AI, but really machine learning, something's going to take that job away from you. So with that all said, and I think we'll wrap up here, in fact, Curt, because I'd love to have you come back on the show in the future, because I think we can turn all of this on its head, and we can have a whole conversation of how do we either set up a meeting with a potential customer where they're able to focus, how we can control an environment, a conversation, the parameters of a phone call, even, of how we can keep them focused. And I think there's multiple layers and elements to that. So I'd love to have you back on the show to do that in the future. But I've got one final question, sir, that I ask everyone that comes on the show. So I know you're not out and out a salesperson. Clearly, publishing a book, you've got to sell it to Wiley, which clearly you have done and done a great job with that. So you will have some insights to this, I'm sure. But if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I'm an external processor, so there's the first thing that I thought is courage, the need to just jump out and take a risk. But in some sense, I don't know that was actually what ever caused me to do well or not well. And I think, if I'm really honest, it was, how am I early on? Because my first job was in sales, and so I spent 4 years in sales. And as someone who owns a business, I'm always in sales.
Yep.
I think that right now, I would say, how am I simplifying and distilling and making information easy in the format that someone who is constantly overwhelmed feels like is valuable for them. So how am I doing the hard work to make their life easy? Because that's, I think, what people really need today. They need to not have something thrown like, hey, fill out this form, make this hard. I'm going to make this hard on you. They need someone who's doing the hard work for them, because they don't have the energy to do it. So how am I thinking critically about that issue? It's probably the number one thing that I'm interested in right now.
And kind of going back to what I was saying before we start to wrap up there, Curt, of if you have the ability to perhaps ask a few questions, distill down what the potential customer needs, and give it to them in that format. So rather than, examples off my head, if you've got a big PDF with all the data that they need, but you pull out the specific bits of it and you give them, whether it's in person, whether it's email, just the notes that they need, that's you as an individual adding legitimate value to them by saving their willpower, their time, their energy, helping them focus, right? That's something that the audience can all do. But do you think that and I think they do, but I'll ask your thoughts on it, Curt, to wrap up here. Do you think that the prospect, the person that we're dealing with, the person we're engaging with, do you think that they appreciate that, the extra effort that you've gone versus just spamming them with an email with a PDF?
So I think they don't even realize how much they appreciate it. I'm firmly convinced that those moving forward in sales who will be successful and who are today are creating real value for their customers, which seems so obvious, but I see it all the time. Like speakers in particular, they're throwing information at the people that are buying, and they're throwing it like just kitchen sink, or they're saying, "Are you interested in me?" When the people that have grabbed their attention are those who have said, "What is it that this person's looking for? How can I provide it to them so that they look like a hero rather than me looking like a hero to whoever the people that they have to answer to? And how am I making their life easy?" And what's interesting on that is it's in that process that we start to create these real emotional connections and trust, which is the fundamental need that people have always had in who they buy, but is also the biggest challenge today, because it's so easy to just reply back quickly and fast with whatever it is they say they need, not realizing that we might win in the short run, but we've lost in the long run because trust and emotional connection are what drives sales.
Love it. Curt, with that, tell us a little bit about the book, where we can find it, and then where we can find out more about you as well.
Yeah, so the book is called Can I Have Your Attention? Inspiring Better Work Habits, Focusing Your Team and Getting Stuff Done in the Constantly Connected Workplace. It's going to be out everywhere, so I'd love to have you check it out at your nearest bookstore, but easiest is always going to be Amazon. And so if you want to go onto Amazon, read all about it. It's been the hardest project that I've done. It took years of work, but truly also the most satisfying and exciting thing that I've ever done in my career.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to the book, everything else that we talked about, these headphones, which I cannot recommend enough, in the show notes to this episode at salesmanpodcast.com. With that, Curt, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for the fact that we've covered a lot of ground here and you've kept up. So I really appreciate that, mate. You've obviously had your focus and attention on me and the show and the audience. So I do appreciate that. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Will. Excited to be here and excited to come back.